Okay, folks, you should have by now gone through the little introductory quiz that was on asexual reproduction. It had a video attached and it had a list of factors, some of them sexual due to sexual reproduction, some of them due to asexual. You were asked to write some notes and then click some things, and now we're into here to see whether or not you were right or wrong. If you haven't done that at this point, please go out of this video. It's going to be the assignment that popped at 8:40. This one will have come a little bit later, and away you go. So for those of you that have done that, this is our learning intention for this little section. We're going to have two learning intentions today. So the first one is to understand the differences between sexual and asexual reproduction. So what you're going to do for me is you are going to give it this table, this little header, differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. You can turn your page sideways if you wish. Divide it in two for yourself, the little section that's left, and we essentially want to have 4 bullet points, and some of them are only a couple of words long. So you'll see as we go through. So in terms of how many parents are involved in sexual reproduction, well, we've done human reproduction, and therefore we know now that there are 2 parents that have to be involved, whereas in asexual reproduction there is only 1 parent involved. Having 1 parent in asexual reproduction means that you have identical, what are called daughter cells. So the offspring are identical. There are no gametes involved, whereas we learned in sexual reproduction when we did the human that the definition for fertilization was fusion of male and female gametes to form a zygote. So straight away now we have these sex cells that are involved in sexual reproduction. There is no sex cells involved in asexual reproduction. One of the big bonuses of sexual reproduction is we get genetically different offspring, and in biology they can call this variation. So we get differences in our population because of sexual reproduction, because we are mixing genes. Whereas in asexual reproduction our offspring are genetically identical, there's no differences between them, and it can be called cloning. So make sure now you have those written for yourself. And in terms of which organisms reproduce asexually, well, as far as we're concerned, plants are really good at doing both sexual and asexual reproduction. Strawberry runners would be a real common thing. So if you've ever grown strawberries, they put out these horizontal stems, and when the stems touch the ground they form roots, and that'll keep on going if you leave it go. In yeast, which is used in brewing to make beer, they asexually reproduce by budding. So this is a little bud here, and sometimes what you see is the bud forms a bud, and that'll keep on going. Sometimes they break off and then it just starts again. And you also see it in bacteria. Bacteria do it a slightly different way, in that they double their genetic material that they hold. The cell gets bigger and it essentially puts genetic material to each side. So there's 1 side, 2 sides, and then they split in 2. And this is called binary fission. There are some animals that asexually reproduce, but these are the examples that I'm giving you today. The last thing that you need to be aware of is what are the advantages of asexual reproduction. So why is it that plants, bacteria, fungi, or yeast do this? So the first thing is you only need 1 parent. So therefore you're not waiting around to find a mate or a second parent. The disadvantage, as we've said, is there is little variation in your offspring. They're all going to be genetically identical. One of the advantages is if the parent has good traits, you're passing it on to the offspring. You're not having to worry about what the other parent is going to bring to the mix, because it's just 1 parent's genes. The alternative is if that parent has bad genes, they are going to be passed on to their offspring. It is a really, really quick process. You don't need pollinators, you don't need to form fruit, you don't need to disperse your seeds. It's really, really quick. You just form a new individual. And a disadvantage, especially if you're a commercial grower of plants, is that if you pick a parent that is susceptible to a disease, well, now all your offspring are going to be susceptible to that disease too. And now we're going to move on to the second part of our lesson. So we are going to look a little bit at genetics, and this picture is a really, really good way to show how genetics works. So in the dad genes, they're going to be the horizontal lines, and the mom genes are going to be vertical lines. And when male and female sexually reproduce, their offspring is a combination of their genes. Some good, some bad, but it's going to be a combination. So 50% of the genes you have come from your mum, 50% of the genes you get come from your dad, and our genes are pairs. So this is half the pair, and this is the other half, and they literally battle it out inside you to give you your eye color that you have, your eye height, whole variety of characteristics. Now, if we were in school, we would be doing this as a thing per share. I'd be giving you a whole thing of envelopes. I would be asking you to not chat first for a second, have a look at the photos and separate them by criteria or what you think they're telling you. And then you'd pair up, and then you'd look at another groups and we'd see what we could figure out. So there's no video this time. You are going to put the photos in the next thing into two groups for yourself. I'm going to tell you that one group are inherited factors, so things that you would have gotten from your parents, and there's 4 numbers involved with this group. So what are the 4 numbers? And in terms of the second group, the photos that are left over, how would you group them? How would you describe them? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, this is 5 here, 6, 7, 8 and 9. I'm going to ask you to pause now and see, can you figure out which things are inherited and which are the other group, and how would you describe the other group if you had to? Alrighty, so we're going to look at the inherited factors group, and I'm hoping at this point that you picked brown eyes, that you picked flower color, that you picked skin color, that you picked type of earlobe. So they were numbers 1, 3, 5 and 8 in terms of inherited characteristics that offspring got from their parents. In terms of our second set, these are all the things that are in our second set. So it would be what you think they have in common. So we have ability to speak different languages up here. We have ability to play a musical instrument. We have singing voice. We have musculature, and we've seen these guys when we did pH, the hydrangeas. So what is it that all of these things have in common? Well, these things are what are called environmental factors. So they're not inherited, they just occur because of where you live, what's your type of culture, but they are not inherited. So if bodybuilders have babies, the babies won't be more muscular than any other baby, because this is an environmental factor. Here for our hydrangeas, the color of the hydrangea is dependent on the pH of the soil, so on its environment, and that'll determine its color. So in terms of our little notes for this section, our learning intention is to differentiate between inherited and environmental factors. We are going to have a definition for genetics, so it's the study of heredity, the passing on of genes, and inherited characteristics. So in terms of inherited factors, and I'm really, I suppose, discussing these in terms of us humans, but they do apply to plants as well. They are passed on from parent to offspring by genes, and in the case of us, it's a result of sexual reproduction. Okay, and the examples are things like eye color, hair color, skin color, types of earlobes. There are some diseases which can be inherited, you can pass on to your offspring. So cystic fibrosis is one where individuals can't deal with salt. It builds up in their system. Once upon a time, it used to be by literally licking the baby, they would determine whether or not you had cystic fibrosis, because their skin would be very, very salty. But things like hemophilia is another inherited disease. So in terms of our environmental factors, they will more than likely be called environmental factors, but they're essentially non-inherited, and they're things that we learn or arise because of our lifestyle or our culture. so can't be passed on to offspring. So things like ability to play an instrument or a sport and ability to speak a different language. So wouldn't we all love to be able to be fluent in Irish? I know I would, but unfortunately that wasn't meant to be. It didn't get passed on from my parents. Now there are certain things that can be a combination of both. So environmental factor can be the colour of your hair. So once upon a time I used to have lovely purple hair, but that was an environmental factor. Your body weight can also be a combination of both. So if you decide you're going to eat McDonald's every day for a year, then you are probably going to be a different body weight than what you would be if you ate healthily. So some factors can be a combination of both inherited and environmental. So please be aware of that. Now, there is this video link, so I'm going to call it NASA Twins for you if you wish to have a look. So what this is this was a study done where they put one twin in space for a year and left the other on the ground, and then they looked at a whole variety of characteristics and traits for when they came back down, and to see how being in space affected one twin over the other. I'm also going to have the link for this Pamela story, and you really need to watch this link before we move on to the last part of our lesson. They're going to talk about a condition called sickle cell anemia, and this condition is now more prevalent in Ireland as there is a much larger African community and people of African origin now living here. So 10% of Africans have sickle cell anemia, and there's an awful lot of what are called carriers. So this has relevance to us in Ireland now. So you have to go out of this, watch the video for yourself, and when you come back in, you are going to be answering these questions. So you can answer them in your copy as 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A, and then you're just going to be putting those into your class homework page when you are done. So I'm going to stop talking now, and you can go and do that. Now, for this activity, again, obviously if we were in lesson it would be easier to do, but it's not. So you would be doing it in groups of 3, and we'd have, a mom, a dad and a child, and we'd have 4 socks. So you can ask mom and dad to help you, absolutely, or if you're going to do it yourself just by your lonesome, you are going to still need 4 socks. So what I suggest is you pick one plain colour sock. So if you have a pair of white socks, then use that. Or if you're plain black pair of socks, doesn't matter as long as it is plain in colour. You are going to take one pair of patterned socks, so that's these guys here. And if you are playing with your parents, the instructions are on the next slide, and I'll make sure that they're in OneNote. And if you are doing it by yourself, then what I suggest you do is you give, I'm going to call it a white sock and a patterned sock on your left hand, and a white sock and a patterned sock on your right hand, and your left hand can be mum, your right hand can be dad. And what you're going to do is you're going to close your eyes, mix the socks up, 2 on your left, 2 on your right, and you're going to pick one from your left and one from your right. Now, if they are both the patterned pair, then the outcome is that if that's, so this is like mom and dad having sex, sorry to gross you out, but this particular baby, if you get the pattern pair, then this baby would have sickle cell anemia. If when you do it you have a mix, then they are what are called a carrier, a healthy carrier, because they have the gene which is the white sock. And if you get 2 white socks, then the child is going to be normal. So what you're going to do for me is you're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 trials, and what colour socks were chosen, and decide is that child going to have sickle cell anemia or not. So all of this, the instructions and the sock combinations are going to be in OneNote for you. You might like your parent to do it with your parents, or your baby brother's sister, or your bigger brother or sister, or if your dog is really good at picking things out, maybe dog will help. Okay, but give it a go, because it'll set us up for our next lesson. You'll have a much better understanding of it. Now there is one other thing that I need for you to do in your homework. So next week we are going to do a case study on our inherited characteristics. obviously we're not going to be in a classroom together, but what I need for you to do is there is a Microsoft Forms quiz to collect our data. So it asks you, tick the box, which box, are you straight haired or curly haired, are you brown eyes or blue eyes, are you lobed ears or lobeless, can you roll your tongue, can you not? So that's going to allow me to collect the data so that you will have data next week to work on. So I'm on Zoom for the duration of our double today, so if you have any issues, please come and have the chat.